Hi, and welcome to Ria's Ramshack. Okay, so we're doing video now. Hope you join us along for the ride. If you want to listen to the whole show, it does air on WRMI 5050, 10 p.m. Eastern on Sundays, and also WRMILegends.com. I do also post the episodes on Substack, n2rj.substack.com, and there is an RSS feed so you can get them into your favorite podcast player. I believe they're on Apple Podcasts. Not sure about the rest. Anyway, so this week we're going to talk about the FCC and deregulation and what it means for you. So as we all know, the new administration is on a deregulation track with the help of Elon Musk. And, political opinions aside, this is the reality that we have to deal with. So they're proposing, there was a memo sent out, basically a proposal saying delete. And that essentially means get rid of any burdensome regulations that the FCC may have. There are a lot of hams some of whom I've talked to would like to see some specific things gotten rid of. I do not think that the FCC, and I'll say it right out, I do not think that the FCC nor this administration is going to want to go in there with a scalpel. You saw it himself. Mr. Musk wants to go in there with a chainsaw. And he got a chainsaw from the new leader of Argentina. Country I've been to, by the way. And Argentina it's an interesting place. I had some fun time there. If you ever go there, go to Buenos Aires. You can see tango. You can also see a lot of their history and really some interesting street scenes. And I also took a tour of Pope Francis, his whole places where he was when he was growing up. I visited some of the churches he was preaching in, and then also the Metropolitan Cathedral, which is where he was before he became Pope. So, he is an important historical figure, whether or not you're Catholic. But he is, it is an interesting thing. So anyway, that aside, so they want to go in there with a chainsaw. And here are some things I think that we could probably work with that model. So just stick with me here for a second. So the first thing is that, do you really want us to micromanage? Does the FCC really want to micromanage the handbands? If you look at the regulations for other countries, those other countries that have amateur radio licenses, which is nearly every country. I think there are like 3 or 4 that don't have ham radio licenses. Obviously North Korea, probably Yemen, Eritrea, and I don't know who else, but that's essentially it. Everybody else, what they do is when they give you a license, they said these are your amateur bands and these are your privileges. And by privilege, we mean that we are not dividing up the bands into little pieces and telling you that you cannot operate this mode on that portion of the band. Most countries would see that as a waste of time for their national regulators to do. And we should probably end up, or we will probably end up, adopting the same mindset. Well, that could be the reality with this new FCC and this new administration. So we could start with getting rid of the mode segments, right? So we don't have, for example, restricting phone to the upper portion of the band. I think you could just, do away with all of these restrictions and basically say, do what you want, regulate yourselves, work it out amongst yourself. You already have voluntary band plans. Leave a little segment below for the CW operators voluntarily. But even so, the CW operators can pretty much go anywhere because their signals are so narrow they could fit in between. I could see on a very busy band like a phone band, that like a phone contest, you might have some problems. Other than that, I think the bands are mostly empty most of the time. Okay. That's that. I do think also that we have a bunch of restrictions on beacon stations, and you have things like whisper, for example. So as far as I know, nobody really fully obeys the beacon regulations when it comes to whisper. Technically, you're not supposed to have unattended beacons. Not technically, you're not supposed to have unattended beacons outside the beacon segments of the bands. And a lot of people who run whisper just leave it running and they go about their way. So I think getting rid of that pointless, useless regulation is another thing. Get rid of that rule, because nobody obeys it anyway. And as far as I know, nobody has been prosecuted or fined, or that has never been enforced. So I think definitely we should get rid of that. Licensing. Reduce the number of licenses down to 2 classes. Have a introductory license, otherwise known as a foundation or a novice license, and then have a full license. So the introductory license will be all bands, all modes, 100 watts. The full license will be all bands, all modes, 1500 watts. That's it. Make it simple. The reason for this is, well, first of all, besides the fact that a lot of other countries do it, incentive licensing came about as a way to go and fight the Cold War, to incentivize people to increase their technical knowledge about radio so we could do better than the Soviets. And that time has sort of come and gone. I mean, let's face it, today most people who are getting involved in tech are not doing it because of ham radio and DX. They're doing it because of the money. If you look at like a FANG company, FANG meaning Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google, and then a few others, they are incentivizing people with hundreds of thousands of dollars in compensation. A lot of other companies are following suit as well. I mean, you should see some of the stuff that people tell me I could be making money doing. But, these tech companies are like, come join us and make a boatload of money. So there is really no need to do it with ham radio. And ham radio has kind of become sort of a technological backwater anyway. There are a few notable exceptions. There is where you have the ham sci. Ham sci is great. It's a great scientific endeavor, and it's encouraging a lot of people to do research. It is a minority of the ham radio community right now. I mean, most hams are in it for emergency communications or hobbies. And, it's just, that's just the reality of it, right? So I think it's time to adapt and grow with the times. I think we should essentially tell people that, basically we should tell the FCC that we should have just 2 classes of license and make the exam such that it is a full amateur radio license that teaches you about high power and safety and non-interference, and a low power introductory license that basically teaches you about the basic rules. So, of course, you do require some radio knowledge as required by the ITU and international treaties. Don't know how much value that holds these days, but that is essentially what we need to be doing. Okay, so that's one of them. The other one I would say is encryption. I know a lot of people are saying, well, some people are actually, they're like, yeah, we want encryption. Some people say, no, encryption is the third rail. It is kind of the third rail. I wouldn't want wholesale encryption in the ham bands because that just blows the self-policing out the window. I think we definitely need to have a balance between encryption and non-encryption. Allow encryption, full encryption, transport encryption. Cyber people know what I'm talking about. During times of declared emergency. Okay? And that's it. Otherwise, allow public key cryptography for things like secrets, passwords, such like that. So let's say somebody logs into a server somewhere and they have to pass a password. That could be using public key cryptography without violating the rules. right? Let's make the rules so that that is allowed, explicitly allowed. The contents of the communication, unfortunately, still needs to be monitored. I know some people say, well, that's not feasible. I still want to have a private channel. No, this is ham radio. This is where there is distrust among the community for having a fully private channel on ham radio. So I don't think that's going to go. Other rules I like to see go are, maybe the licensing should probably be privatized, probably out of FCC's hands. Let the NCVC or some organization, not the ARRL by itself, because I think that's going to be too controversial, but have a group like the NCVC handle licensing, issue call signs, and then have that basically registered with the government, and let them deal with it, and then this will take that burden directly off of the government. Maybe we could see a reduction in license fees, even though I doubt it. But we're always like we're already like halfway through that anyway. We're already doing that halfway, where we're actually issuing licenses. Like when you do the upload to the FCC computers do it, and we enter all the data. Like the VECs enter all the data. So cut out the middleman. Just let them do it. Get rid of license renewals. So license renewals are another thing I'd like to see gone away. In a lot of countries, they issue lifetime licenses. And lifetime licenses essentially means you have a license, it's good until you're dead. Okay? And for U.S. citizens, they're doing all of this talk about how they're auditing Social Security for dead people, collecting Social Security. They can easily tie in the Social Security death records to your license, and then once you pass, the funeral home gets notified. The funeral home notifies Social Security, and then that cancels your amateur radio license too. So that could be done. For non-residents, what they could do is they could go onto an online portal. Maybe they get an email every 5 years saying, hey, revalidate your license. Go online, click a button. Am I alive? Yes. Are I still interested in having a ham radio license? Yes. E-signature, boom, and you're done. If they still want to collect a license fee, well, they can do that too. They could send you an email, and then you click, and then you pay. You could pay with Apple Pay or Google Pay, and boom. Don't make it as convoluted as it is now. Have you seen the FCC's website for renewing an amateur radio license? It is the most convoluted thing in the entire world. I have no idea why they think that people will be okay with that. So that needs to change as well. GMRS licenses. I think the whole thing should just go away. I think they should just not have licenses anymore. Instead, issue the license with the radio, with the sale of the radio, and charge a small fee. Maybe like $5 with the radio. They will probably make the same amount of revenue and more, right? And then that's it. No need to have this complicated FCC process of getting a GMRS license, and because most people really just don't get the licenses anyway, and it's become beyond pointless right now. So do that as well. Other things, RF exposure. I did a whole thing about RF exposure compliance. I think for ham radio, we really need to... It is a double-edged sword. I think for where you're affecting other people, you definitely need to have it. But where you're just affecting yourself, I think that part needs to be simplified and basically discarded, because if you are harming yourself, then the risks already. And to be honest, I think a lot of people really don't even follow the RF exposure regulations. And it's basically unenforceable right now because nobody really does that. I think the only time it'll come up is if somebody complains of sickness, and then they get... they basically blame the radio antenna next door, and then you have the burden of proof that, you complied with the rules. So I think if you have close by neighbors, you should be allowed to do it. If you live out in the middle of the woods, then you should be completely exempt, right? So, but people always make a lot of things. I mean, you saw the whole brouhaha people have over vaccines and all sorts of stuff, and how they claim that how 5G is giving them cancer and all sorts of things. So it it really isn't something you're gonna win, but at least make it less burdensome. Emergency communications, let's go back to that a little bit. I see a lot of it moving towards services like Starlink, and Musk is in there. He's going to want to pump Starlink as much as possible because Tesla seems to be going down the toilet. And I say that as a Tesla owner. I've been a Tesla owner for a long time, and it doesn't look pretty. No, it doesn't look pretty. So, all right, those are some of my thoughts on the whole thing. If you have any others, you can dump them in the comments, or you can send me an email, ria@n2rj.com, and we'll talk about them on a future show. Let me know if you like this format, and we'll talk about it. Of course, you can listen to the whole show on WRMI 5050, or you can also catch some of the episodes on Substack, n2rj.substack.com.